So the major change over the course of the first half of the 19th century in the North is urbanization. With urbanization, we start to see the rise of these massive American cities, especially the North. And here you can just see uh, how the cities are concentrated in the North, and how we have this huge disparity between what's going on in the North and what's going on in the South. So we start to see increasing concentrations of wealth in the cities. We start to see this development of a modern class system in which the rich are getting richer, the poor are kind of working in these manufacturing sectors. And what we see is a rise of a middle class that wants to intervene and work to save the lives of the poor. The poor are increasingly viewed as problematic, savage, and they're not working hard enough. And so it's the duty and goal of the middle class to define itself against both classes. And in doing so, they're working to show how they want to intervene and improve the lives of the poor. But again, regionalization, urbanization is going to work to reinforce urbanization. Urbanization is going to work to reinforce the regional divide between the North and the South. So here you can see major sources of immigration. And the two groups to keep in mind are the Irish and the Irish and the Germans. You have to think about push and pull factors for the reasons that people are coming to the United States. Right? In Ireland, you have the potato famine. In Europe, you have revolutions, you have religious persecution, you have political and economic instability, lack of economic mobility. And so the idea here is that huge numbers of Irish are going to immigrate to America. They're going to settle in places like Boston and New York, and they're going to be too poor to migrate elsewhere. At the same time, large numbers of Germans are going to come in, and they'll have a bit more money. They're going to be able to move inland, places like Chicago and Wisconsin. And so what you should do is think about the similarities between the two. Right? Despite this slight economic difference, the Irish are going to be more mistreated than the Germans, but both groups are going to be viewed with suspicion. Right? You're going to see large-scale anti-immigrant responses by nativists, not Native Americans, nativists. Americans kind of forgetting their own immigrant roots are going to rail against these new incoming German and Irish immigrants. There's fears that these immigrants are going to outbreed, outvote, outcompete, overwhelm the quote-unquote native stock. And again, this becomes a bigger, they do, certainly at times, the Irish move into political prominence in places like Tammany Hall, but that's later on in the story. There's fears of Roman Catholic separateness, fears of the Roman Catholic Church in a way that's going to stay in the United States up until really the election of John F. Kennedy in the 1960s. So we start to see the rise of a separate Roman Catholic school system. And the third group that's coming in are African Americans. African Americans are coming into these cities, and so they're just like in the past, they're experiencing racism. Again, this is mostly in the North, where we see a free Black population, but they're going to be treated differently based on race. African American women are going to be the household servants, the cooks, the washerwomen, and child nurses, where men are kind of going to be economically marginalized as longshoresmen, day laborers, sailors, and seamen. But again, it's just economic marginalization based on race. Right? Day laborers make a lot less than people with a steady employment. So certainly, large numbers are joining the middle class, but again, compared to the relatively small percentage of the population, they're targeted with racial violence. And what we see is theaters working to promote urban solidarity, but also reinforce urban differences. You start to see the rise of things like minstrel shows, which are going to promote and play off African American stereotypes and promote racial differences between white and non-white people, imitating and mocking African American people in song, dance, and speech pattern. People are going to increasingly read cheap, sensationalized newspapers. Right? As a way to sell newspapers, the news becomes more dramatic, more sensationalized, kind of more out to get people to buy the newspapers. And finally, we start to see the rise of baseball. Right? Baseball becomes a major pastime going up to the 1840s in a way that's going to kind of recaptivate and give urban youths something to do. And so in cities, we see a class divide between the rich, the middle class, and the poor. We see a racial divide between whites and non-whites. So Irish initially are non-white, but move into white. We start to see religious divides between Protestants and Catholics, and we start to see a generational divide between this emerging youth culture and existing kind of older generation culture. So think about the technological change, transportation change, and urbanization that are all going to factor into these major differences between the North and